Yeah, so the project that we're working on is called Zcash. Really the focus is, I mean, when we talk about our mission, it's empowering economic freedom, privacy and security, the idea of consent. That's all part of that mission. So Zcash, actually, I like to believe, like Zcash was really conceived by Satoshi, because what he said was on the BitcoinTalk.org forum, on the forum was, if we could figure out how to apply zero knowledge, the zero knowledge cryptography that was discovered in the 1980s at MIT, if we could apply it to Bitcoin, it would be a better Bitcoin. He just couldn't figure out how to make that work, right? Because Bitcoin, you have to have all of these nodes being able to validate all the transactions. So you have this theoretical math that was invented in the 80s that nobody had ever figured out how to use practically.
Yeah.
It's all this crazy moon math. And he was talking about it, how Finney was really interested in zero knowledge. How Finney was a friend of the founder of Zcash, Zuko Wilcox, who wrote the first blog about Bitcoin, actually. So this stuff goes really way back.
Yeah.
So some scientists were working on how to solve it kind of independently at 7 different universities, Technion, Tel Aviv, MIT,
Wow.
UC Cal, Johns Hopkins, and they kind of figured out how to apply zero knowledge cryptography to Bitcoin, approached the Bitcoin core team, said the cryptography is too novel, right? It's too risky to put this on an asset that has so much value.
Right.
So think about maybe another coin and applying it there. So they got together with Zuko, the founder, forked the Bitcoin code base, added this zero knowledge cryptography on top of it, and that's what became Zcash. That was launched in late 2016.
No, it's fantastic. I mean, I love the idea of it. The part that I am trying to grapple with, and I'm sure you all may get some of this as well, is with mass adoption of different types of currencies that are out there. They all have their own use case. You can look at Ethereum, what they're trying to do with the ZK snarks, where governments are now literally looking at this very carefully, more so than they did before, I think, because it's mass adoption for the most part. Where do you all fit in this? How do you explain this to various government agencies, call it the United States government agency, when their biggest concern is AML, KYC, all of that sort of stuff?
Yeah, I think we're at, so like I've been around long enough to have gone through the early days of the internet. And so I was on the internet before there was the web, and then we had this browser come out, Mosaic, that allowed us to like do this hyperlinking thing, which was super fun and exciting, and all of that was transparent. Netscape attempted to add encryption because you couldn't really do commerce with it, right? Because if I was going to use a browser and buy something from you over the web, then anybody can see that transaction information. So Netscape introduced SSL, they introduced this idea of encryption in order to bring about commerce and communication in order to ensure safety. The government at the time, NSA, actually Al Gore was involved, said this is too dangerous because what's going to happen? Criminals are going to use this thing. They're going to, and so that was the narrative. That was the first crypto wars in the 1990s are part of that. But what happened? Right, in order for us as a society to continue to evolve and embrace this technology, we recognized there was a need for that encryption just to be able to engage online. Otherwise, the internet wouldn't work. It would not be safe. So fast forward to today, all those government agencies that were kicking against encryption all support encryption, in fact, mandate encryption on their websites, right? So we're at this time today where if you go to a bank, and you're integrating with, you log on to your bank account, you have an expectation that you can see that, your bank can see that, but nobody else can peer into your bank account and see all that kind of information and do stuff. It's just a basic expectation woven into the web. On payments today, like this is also nascent, this kind of digital payments thing that's decentralized. And so sure, like law enforcement who are trying to catch bad guys, they're like, oh, I love this thing because it's completely transparent. But the reality is that if they can see that data, so can friends and family, so can a business that's trying to target you, so can a foreign government, so can hackers from North Korea. All of them can see that and have access to that same data and create actually very rich profiles of people that are interacting. So from a user security standpoint, it's horrible. If you send me a Bitcoin, I can see your address, all your transaction data. If you're a company all your customers. Your competitors can see all your customers, and they can trace all of that. If you're a foreign government, you can see all your citizens' data. At some point, it's untenable, and it will be, ultimately, it's going to be mandated, I think. So they still have regulatory power over the exchange, just like a bank, right?
Yes.
So if you, whatever it is, $600, $10,000, if you decide to put that much money in your bank account or withdraw that much money, then it might flag something called the SAR, a suspicious activity report, to then send. And they may or may not stick in the database or do something with it. But likewise, they can do the same things with exchanges without having to regulate. And in fact, the individual's transaction, in fact, it's better, because if they're regulating the exchange, then they can get visibility through a warrant or as part of a SAR, regardless of whether you think the Bank Secrecy Act and third-party doctrine is valid and constitutional. They can have access to that data. You can be sure your transaction is completely private to you and between you and the counterparty, the exchange, but some hacker in North Korea can't see that.
Right. So what about in the DEX world?
What about the DEX world?
So if what you said makes total sense, if you have maybe a government agency that's worried or concerned about transactions, they can go to a centralized exchange. Let's say it's whatever, Coinbase, Kraken, Binance, whatever. But if it's in a decentralized world where you're just connecting to other nodes, to other people that have connected their wallets into that, they don't necessarily have insight into that. Is that fair to say?
That's fair to say, yeah. If it's completely encrypted, they wouldn't necessarily have insight into that. They would have, the DEXs aren't fiat on-ramp, off-ramp, so they have access where their fiat is involved, right? Where it's regulated by a U.S. entity, and the U.S. dollar, you can connect your bank account. That's where they can regulate legally. But this kind of idea that you can exchange, it's like exchanging, if I was to give you a $10 bill between you and me, or I go through an intermediary because maybe I want gift cards or something else, that's not under the purview. So there's this kind of different kind of technology dynamic with the DEX for sure, but those aren't regulated. There's not a fiat component to those.
Okay. There's so many different paths I can go down. So I'm assuming you would think that there's a significant difference between like a Tornado Cash and Zcash or Monero. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, there's differences. Yeah.
So, I mean, there's use cases for all of them, depending on what your end goals are, what you'd like in terms of general privacy versus, a mixer, so to speak. What is the difference between Zcash and Monero?
Yeah, the difference is fundamentally the kind of the level of privacy guarantees that you get. So it's really important to understand, like, privacy is not binary. It's either like you don't have privacy or you do have privacy. So if I give you that $10 bill, right, is that a private transaction? Well, you can see me, you know my name, I can see you, I know your name. We have a witness that's sitting right over here, and maybe she's recording it on her phone. We have all these people that are walking around on whatever cameras that are around here. So there's an expectation, there's a certain level of privacy that's part of that, but it's like not perfect privacy. And anytime you have a transaction between two people, there's never perfect privacy because there's two people involved, right? And your most risky person, data leak, is your counterparty. So with Zcash, the Zcash is probably the closest to a digital cash, where you can transact digitally. All of that information is encrypted, so it's not even public on a public blockchain. Now there's two types of addresses with Zcash. So there's transparent, which is the Bitcoin style, and then there's shielded. But from a shielded, there's no, or I would say very little data leakage. The only data leakage on the chain is that there's a transaction that occurred, right? And there was a fee that was paid, but you can't see any of the two counterparties or anything contained, their balances, their transaction history. Monero is more akin to a shell game, but there's multiple layers that they have on top of it in terms of mixing, IP obfuscation, some other kinds of things, but it's a probabilistic privacy. And so what happens is, so if we say privacy is not binary, right, there's this kind of range in crypto land, there's this range of Bitcoin to Zcash, and people that come in the middle, right? And Monero is closer to Zcash than in some other things. Maybe Ethereum is basically like Bitcoin, right? And you get to L2s and all this kind of stuff. But Bitcoin is an anonymity enhancing cryptocurrency, which is a label the DOJ likes to use
Yes.
to drive privacy coins. But the reality is all of them are. And I can use Bitcoin, I got a pseudonymous address, and I can try flipping addresses or using a mixer or something like that. The thing is with probabilistic privacy is that the way that surveillance works is not based on a single transaction. So you might hear Monero folks say, and I love like Monero folks, kind of. There's some of them that are like total trolls and horrible. But there's like good, well-meaning people in that community. But like if you look at something like chain analysis, there is evidence that chain analysis can de-anonymize up to like 55% of Monero transactions. So Monero folks will say, well, you have probable deniability, right? You can say this transaction wasn't me because whatever, and so that nobody can prosecute. But that's not how surveillance works, right? So if you're watching somebody, you have 55% probability that's them, and then you have another transaction, and that's 55% probability, and you have another transaction, that's and now I start to aggregate that with other data. Where was this person at this particular time? Like, what are they posting anything social online? Have I been able to like dox their anon account on crypto Twitter against whatever? It's this aggregation of data and the changes of the data over time that allow somebody to surveil, whether it's a government or a business that's trying to figure out how to target you, and those tools are getting better.
So no, you answered something, or semi-answered something that I was just about to ask. With chain analysis, do they have any purview into the Zcash at this stage? Have they been able to sort of...
Transparent transactions.
Okay.
Shielded transactions,
Shielded
they kind of
now.
completely lose the scent. Right?
Okay.
Yep.
I've been at many conferences where, speaking with chain analysis and others, they say that they have. And that's why I was kind of curious.
Yeah, it's like... So chain analysis can be used by an exchange to do kind of risk-based modeling of what's happening, but they can't peer into, 100% cannot peer into shielded. They can peer into, like the majority of Zcash transactions are still transparent. Most people use it because most exchanges, there's 2 exchanges in the world that allow you to withdraw to a shielded address. Every exchange in the world allows you to deposit from an exchange from a shielded address to the exchange. Now, what they can see is if you have a shielded Zcash, you put it on the exchange can see that that came from you, right? They have your KYC data, but they can't see your balance, they can't see any of that other stuff, and neither can anybody else, so you have privacy protections. But chain analysis can see that transaction because it went from a shielded to a transparent when it moved to the exchange, right? They can see 7 Zcash worth of value went into the exchange at such and such a time. And then if it's pushed out to a transparent address, they can track what address that it went to, and if it goes transparent to transparent, then they have some visibility over a large majority of the transactions that occur because those transactions are transparent. Shielded transactions, it's a dead end.
So this is a tough question, and I know you probably get this all the time, but I feel like it's important for me to ask, and that is, when we're dealing with just generally bad elements, so to speak, maybe it's terrorism or other, and they're using the shielded, what are your feelings about that? It's just the way that things are in the world, or like how do, people that really want to prevent that sort of thing from happening, what do we do as a society around that? Like, how do we handle that?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, I had a conversation with a couple gentlemen from the DOJ about this. We happened to be sitting together for a lunch. It was like super fascinating. And one was working on issues related to child porn, and the other one related to terrorism. And their questions were like, how can you justify providing tools that can be used by these bad actors? Like, what if we see on a dark website a large, purchase of a large, cache of guns or something like that, and we need to catch that person before they kill a lot of people. Right. But we can't because the address is, it's completely shielded. So there's a couple things. One, largely it's not used for that, but the question that I had back is, do you have other tools, or is this the only tool that you have for capturing this person? They say, of course not. We have all kinds of other tools. This just makes it easier. Right? So it goes back to like the kind of famous thing is like a lot of stuff is done over encrypted messaging. does the government want to be able to eavesdrop on all those things? We saw that happen with NSA, right? In the name of safety and freedom after 9/11. So we want to be able to track all these activities of all of these citizens. You got to make a decision, is that worth compromising 99.999% of people's freedoms and self-sovereignty in this country? And you got to make that call. So do I believe that it's worth protecting the vast majority of people's freedom for all time to have encryption? 100%.
Okay.
Are there going to be people that use it for bad things? 100%. Let's use the myriad of tools that we have to do that.
That's fair. I mean, it is a tough question to wrap the head around. I mean, I've been thinking about this for the last 5 years at least. And it's the one that sort of sits out there when I speak with the government agencies as well. And it's, people just generally aren't aware. They think that like Bitcoin is anonymous, pseudonymous.
Right.
And so they've always rested on their laurels with that one. But now, as this becomes more and more a thing, it's going to be interesting to see where this all goes. But okay, looking forward for the organization, what you guys are working on, is there anything in particular that you're hoping to deliver or come out with any time over the course of the next year or so? Is there anything coming down the road?
Yeah, our focus is really on developing what we call developing a world-class user experience for ZEC. So ZEC the token.
Okay.
And so in a Web3 world, a token might not live on just one protocol, right? It might live multi-chain. So looking at user experience tools that allow people to do everyday things with ZEC and protect their privacy, whether directly we're shipping a wallet, for example, or integrating with third parties. So like folks like Flexa, the ability to natively store your ZEC shielded and then go buy a Chipotle burrito with it.
Right.
So Chipotle doesn't have your data.
Yes.
Neither does a credit card, whatever. Working on those kinds of use cases because we want to kind of interweave privacy with the user experience. So it's just a basic expectation like you have with your browser today when you go to your bank or Amazon or whatever. So that's a key focus area. Interoperability then becomes a key element to that behind the scenes in order to enable and unlock those kinds of things. And then a key part of interoperability is actually a potential move from proof of work to proof of stake. So we're doing that R&D, and that has to do with proof of work probabilistic finality versus a more certain finality that you can get with proof of stake, and some other reasons, but that's another area of research.
So you're moving towards proof of stake eventually?
Like ECC, we have made a recommendation to the community that we move to proof of stake over the next 2 to 3 years.
Wow. Is that primarily because of environmental issues or other?
Well, there's the environmental narrative, and there's many in the Zcash community that sit on both sides of that, right? So there's some that are like, this is not an issue or it's worth it, and there's others that are like, this is absolutely an issue, we need to move.
Okay.
But that's not the sole reason. So when we talk about, like if you're taking ZEC cross-chain, you have to be able to have assurances that ZEC, like something isn't going to get rolled back on this chain over here when something's happening over here, right?
Okay.
So the aspect with proof of work, right, is you add blocks, and as you get more blocks, then it becomes more difficult to roll back. It's probabilistic finality versus which you can get with proof of stake. So that's like a use case. The other thing is like Zcash lost a lot of community members around the world when ASICs were added by Bitmain a couple years ago.
I didn't know that.
It's like people were mining on their PCs, and then all of a sudden there's a $10,000 device, and they can't afford it, they're out, right? Which is, so there's all kinds of arguments against like proof of stake and plutocracy and whether or not that's a good or bad thing. But there is also true that somebody could have a little bit of ZEC, stake, delegate that ZEC, and earn additional ZEC. Especially in places where they might not easily have access to ZEC through a centralized exchange because it's been, banned by a government or something like that. Right?
Are there a lot of exchanges left that allow you to trade Zcash at this point?
Almost
I feel like,
all of them.
Really?
Yeah, Korea is an exception.
Okay.
So there's a couple countries. Korea kind of followed Japan. Japan didn't officially ban Zcash after the CoinCheck hack in 2018, but it kind of unofficially, because all of the exchanges went through process improvement orders, and one of the requirements was that you have to delist any coins that are used for nefarious purposes in dark markets or whatever. And so the regulators at the time were just getting educated, didn't know. So the exchanges said, okay, we're going to delist Zcash, Monero, Verge, Dash, but in working with some of those same regulators, they said, like, can you show us proof? We did some work with Rand Corporation to do study on the use of Zcash for money laundering and dark market sites and stuff like that, and basically came back there is none, or it's like 0.002% or something. But the majority of dark market sites operate with Bitcoin, right?
Yeah.
And that was a little bit surprised, but they're learning, and we've had great conversations with regulators in Japan. I think there's a good path there.
Okay, good.
South Korea, it's a little different story right now. They're being a little bit like
more
they
careful.
all the exchanges just delisted Litecoin because they added Mimblewimble. And there was issues with some payment rails providers that was not government or regulatory in Australia. Here, like Gemini, probably the most heavily regulated, most heavily regulated area in the world, right? Support both shielded withdrawals and deposits.
I guess I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah. So you can go to Gemini, buy your ZEC, send it to a shielded address. And the thing that was and we spent a lot of time with DFS, NYDFS, and it's not a regulatory issue. It's a technology issue. Like, it's not historically, until like a couple years ago, you couldn't support ZEC on a mobile wallet, and it was too computationally intensive to support on an exchange. It's really easy to support transparent because it's just like Bitcoin, and they already have the engineering to it. You add this proof composition element, and you add it to things like HSMs, these hierarchical storage or security hardware, and it just requires in some cases it's like firmware updates and stuff like that. So until there's a demand, they're not going to do it. But when there's a demand, but like Cameron and Tyler are like big believers in the project and liberties, and
I figured.
So they pushed it. Yeah.
Okay.
They're great.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Awesome. Hey, anything else you wanted to mention?
I don't know. I mean, those are the big things.
Yeah.
We've been doing some work. We've been trying to do some work with underserved communities. I think this is kind of a different element where we get concerned about, in crypto for the longest time, are we building the same thing in a different skin?
Yes. Yeah. That's what you're saying.
And I spent some time with the Ethereum community at ETH Denver a couple years ago. We were sitting around some leaders, and they were talking about, before DeFi was a thing, talking about the future of DeFi, right? And like what they were saying, I've done a whole bunch of work in India, do work in the slums with these Balwadis, which are English medium schools, and all the stuff they were talking about. And so they're unbanked, underbanked communities, store their cash in rice bags, wear it as jewelry, things like that. Didn't connect. It's like there's no way. You're building tools for you, right?
Yeah.
Which is cool, but let's not deceive ourselves about what's going on. So we started doing some work in the South Bronx called Crypto in Context. We're trying to bring
the unbanked in
crypto to, because what happened is I was out in India doing work in 2003 to build an offshore development center, but people really didn't get it, including me, until you go there, until you sit down and break bread with somebody and really understand. And likewise, we need to get crypto into context. We need to get crypto into, per capita, the South Bronx has less of banks than anywhere else in the US, right? It's 5 miles from Wall Street. 5 miles.
Unbelievable,
right?
Think about it.
And there's all this predatory stuff that's happening. It's like the perfect use case for crypto. But those problems are hard, they're systemic, they run deep. And until people are willing to go set foot in the South Bronx, into some of these places and really engage. So we've done a couple of those pilots. We did one, DCG participated, Masari, BitGo's participated, Gemini, in coming to the South Bronx, sitting with students, kind of hearing issues, trying to do some education both ways, bi-directional education. But we need more of those kinds of programs. I don't know where that fits.
That's brilliant.
But that's a really kind of important initiative from that we're working on the Zcash side.
Okay.
As well.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much for sharing your time with me. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks for meeting with me.
Thank you.
Great questions.